Amen. So Ecclesiastes chapter 4, picking up in verse 1, it says, Solomon says, I returned and considered all the oppression that is done, here it is, under the sun. Because he referenced this before, but you remember his goal in this book was to not mention God or bring God into this equation. But the moment he brought up human suffering, he couldn't help but bring God into the equation and say, it's all going to be taken care of when God deals with it. Oh, wait, that's right. I'm not supposed to say that. So he starts chapter 4 by saying, I returned and considered all the oppression that was done under the sun. So this is taking God out of the equation again. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen evil work that is done under the sun. So again, remember in our study here that Solomon, because of his wealth and his wisdom and his status, he is trying to offer the human race something that most of us will never experience, and that's a life of absolute pleasure, however you want, whenever you want, as much as you want. He could do anything he wanted, unhindered. And so he thought, I should do an experiment in trying to live life to the fullest as a man without God at all. And he will say over and over again how empty and vain that is. And so he revisits the idea of human suffering. And before, the great blessing was to know that God is going to deal with everyone in the end. So the answer to human suffering is that that's here and now, but when God takes care of it, it's dealt with in the end. He says, no, I had to revisit that. And when you think about human suffering and the tears of people that suffer at the hands of evil people, he says there's no hope. It'd be better that you'd never been born than to have to go through life sometimes as an oppressed person. But the issue of human suffering comes up, and again, we've already dealt with the fact that God will make things right. But let me just say this, and people levy the question of God's goodness and his fairness when human suffering is involved. In fact, that's one of the number one things. Is God real? Then why is all this stuff happening, right? Isn't that what people say? If God is real, how come there's starving children? If God is real, Well, first of all, there's a deep theological and biblical reasons for that. And primarily we have to understand the person we're actually angry at is not God, but the evil one, Satan, who has convinced man that sin was worth pursuing. And sin has entered the world by the influence of Satan himself. So let's be angry at the right person here, folks, right? No reason to be mad at God. But I will tell you this. At least when we're angry with God in this kind of way, we're consistent in our anger and our frustrations. Let me say it like this. When things are pleasurable to us, we don't typically balk at them. When things do not go favorably for us, we are very upset and irate. This is the case with God. This is what we're talking about. What I mean to say is, when things are really terrible, we say, how could God let this happen to me? But when things are really good in your life, do you ever stop and say that? How could God let me marry such an awesome person? Do you ever do that? How could God bless me with such an awesome job? I'm really struggling with his fairness. Because what about that guy? You don't do that, do you? When life is pleasurable to you, you have no problem. I have no problem receiving that from God. But when it's not favorable, it's God's fault. What's he up to? What's he think? Now, again, we're consistent because of our sinful nature in life. I just want to point this out to you. It's sort of obvious, but here it is. If your boss comes to you and says, hypothetically, if you have a boss, maybe some of you, your own self-employed guy, whatever, but your boss comes to you and they say, we've done a year review of your work here on the job, and we've decided that we're going to give you a raise. You've done awesome. And you say, whoa, I love this job, and these people are amazing, and I'm so thankful to work here, and the crew and the environment. But if that same conversation went a little more like, we've done a year review and we realized you're not quite producing, and so we're not going to give you a raise. In fact, we're going to take a day of vacation away from you. All of a sudden, you hate your job. You challenge everybody in the business. It's all corrupt. It's never made any sense. You don't even know why you're still there. Sound right? But the only difference was something was favorable or not to you. It was pleasurable or not. And I'm just pointing out the inconsistencies that we all have. How about this one? And I've got more, but they just get weirder, so I'll stop at this one, I promise. How about your doctor? When you go to a doctor and they're like, hey, you're like good to go, 100%, clean bill of health, get out of here. And you're like, woohoo! But if that doctor says, hey, we got some problems, we might need some tests, you're like, I need a second opinion. Notice you never say, I need a second opinion on a clean bill of health. You ever notice that? No one ever, I'm going to another doctor. Figure out if you're real or not. It's only when they say something that is not favorable. So is that fair to say, as human beings? We do that across the board. And it's no different with God. When things are favorable, we just say, oh, yeah, baby. Something's not going our way. God's maniacal and evil. And well, I think Charles Spurgeon said it best when he said that God's people often engrave their trials in marble and write their blessings in the sand. You know, when something bad happens, you're going to carve that in stone to remember the rest of your life. When something good happens, like, I might jot that in the sand, let the beach wash it away. It's human nature, friends. So let's just remember, whenever the issue of human suffering comes up, we are analyzing one aspect of life, and we're making a massive claim from that. Let's just leave it there today. There's more we could say and dig into, but he says, looking at life without God in the factor, it's dismal and terrible, and people's lives would be better if they'd never been born. So that's not a fair way to say it, but that's where he's at. Verse 4, he said, again, I saw that for all the toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full, together with toil and grasping for the wind. So now he's talking about two different characters. There's the lazy cur who does nothing. He has nothing in his hands, and therefore he consumes himself. He's destructive to himself. Then there's the other person that has so much going on that his hands are full. And he says the best result is that you would have a handful. You'd have a handful and live a quiet and peaceable life. And this is something we'll talk about later on, but realize there is something to balance in life. And he's talking about working. And there's one person that doesn't want to work or do anything at all. There's one person that they're a workaholic, we call them, right? They just work. It's like, when is it ever going to be enough? Like, time out. Work. And he's saying there's a balance in life there. There should be. Because it's not good to be empty-handed, and it's not to be so full with your hands that you can't do anything else. And I get it. We live in Maine. We have the old saying, of course, you make hay when the sun is shining. Of course, and that's literally, like, if you do it when it's raining, it's a problem, major problems, right? So you have to make hay when the sun is out. And we live in a seasonal state. And so I would just add that life is seasonal. There's some seasons you might need to commit more to something and really throw down. If you're establishing a work or a business or something, you might not have what is fair and equal balance in your life. But you don't want to live there. You don't want to live in this state forever. And that's the problem with the workaholic is, like, it's one thing to get to a place, get through a season, get established. But when you never stop doing that, you've got a mental problem. You have a real problem. And so remember, too, that God, I do believe, has established a day of rest for us. And I'm almost a hypocrite for even saying it, friends. I was so excited to get Charlie Kirk's book, Stop in the Name of God, and it has sat on the bottom of my bookshelf for a long time. I don't want to even open it. Can I just be honest with you? I don't want to think about slowing down at all. But what's the best remedy? What's the best way to stay balanced in your life? Here's an idea. 6 days you shall work, 1 day you shall give unto God and rest. Even the Lord's Day, friends, and I'm not trying to, like, pick at you guys or anything, but, like, even the Lord's Day, it's not the Lord's Day anymore, is it? It's like the Lord's hour and a half. We got to get to the beach. We got to get the boat out. We got to get ready for tomorrow. It's not the Lord's Day anymore. Churches used to have Sunday morning and Sunday evening services because the whole day was committed to the Lord, right? Like, this is the Lord's day. No, now it's pee-wee and football and baseball and soccer and boating and outing and fishing, and right? It's all that stuff. And I'm just saying there is something to having a day in our week that we shut off the phones, we shut off all the stuff, and we hang out. Even families, how much healthier would families be? Take a day and unplug from the world and spend time with your family and honor God and acknowledge God in that day. I think we'd all be better off. And remember, I know this to be true, God can do more in our lives in 1 minute than we can do in 1,000 lifetimes of work, right? So we can work our little fingers to the bone and be bleeding and sweating, but God can do far more in 10 minutes or a moment in time than we could ever do in lifetimes. So, moving on. Verse 7, he said, "Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors. Nor is his eye satisfied with riches, but he never asks, 'For whom do I toil and deprive myself of good?' This is also vanity and a grave misfortune." Now, connecting to the former passage and looking forward to the next one, he's combining the idea of a person that's a workaholic and lives alone. He has no one to even give his stuff to when he dies. And this guy just never stops producing and making and bringing in stuff, but he's never going to do anything with it. He's just working to work, and that is his life, is his work entirely. And it's so sad. He's saying that person's always going. They never stop to say, like, what is this all for? And it's the proverbial chasing of the carrot. You know, it's like dangling the carrot on the string and you're always chasing it. That idea, like, you ever seen that cute thing they do with like a dollar bill, like on a fishing line, and people can't see the fishing line, but they see the $100 bill and they keep running after it? That's like life for people, isn't it? It's like always running, always trying to get and never getting it. You never actually attain the thing. And probably a good quote to summarize that section is, I forget who said it, but the problem with the rat race is even if you win in the end, you are a rat, right? So you can win at the rat race, but you're still a rat in the end. So just remember that. Verse 9, he says, this is that famous marriage passage that we share on wedding days. He says in verse 9, "Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up." Again, in verse 11, "If two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken." And of course, in the marriage context, they say a husband, a wife, and God is the threefold cord that cannot be easily broken, is the idea. I got to tell you this. This is a note that's been in my Bible for months now, so long before we even studied the book of Ecclesiastes. So I don't know who this is for, but this is for somebody. I wrote this in my Bible months ago. When life gets tough, people isolate. When life gets tough, people isolate. Just remember that. You might be starting to isolate in your life, and I don't know what your circumstances are, but when life gets tough, we start to isolate and shut down and stay close to ourselves. And the problem is you're better off with other people. Now, I am intrigued, and I realize that anything, when you analyze it, is weird. I mean, even this right now is weird. Preaching is weird. Like, if you analyze it, you're like, I'm talking, you're not saying anything, and I just keep going. Isn't it weird to think about? It's like, so don't think about stuff too much. Like, forget about the preaching thing now, okay? But it's like, I do that. I can't help it. Like, my mind's always going. It's like the belt of truth. You're always analyzing. So, like, I'll be thinking, I'll be at a restaurant, and I'll be hearing people talking. I'm like, that is so fascinating that we do this with each other. And I'm just listening. It's like, so yeah, the other day I was driving my truck, and I pulled over, and I saw a nail in the road. And I said, well, and I looked across the street, and there was a sale going on, and it was a yard sale. So I went over there, and I bought a bread box, and then I got my truck, and I picked up the nail, and I went home, and I put the nail in the garage, and I put the bread box, and it's a wonderful bread box. And the other person's like, wow. And then the person that told the grandiose story will say, oh, I feel so much better now. And you're thinking, I literally did not say anything to you, and you feel better now. Isn't that amazing? All I can tell you is we're made for companionship. That doesn't make sense to me. Why is me telling you my little story of some strange, oh, and I bought a bread box. Isn't that wonderful? God is good. Woo! Fantastic! You know, but my point is, it's weird when you think about it, but I can't erase the reality of it. We need companionship. If you don't do that with people, if you don't share your life with people, it gets pretty dismal pretty quick, doesn't it? Living an isolated life is doom upon people. That's why COVID and all the problems we had, the primary problem was isolation. Our government is telling us to isolate. We are the government. Let's not forget that, by the way. Some weird officials were telling us that, but they were quasi-officials at best. But we were agreeing to isolate. And the more that went on, the more unhealthy it was. The suicide rate spiking like crazy because people can't be alone. We need companionship. And so that's the obvious thing in the text here, right? It's better to do life with other people. You don't do life alone. Don't be a loner. It's very lonely, obviously. I'm going to share something about Abraham Lincoln in a few minutes, but for now, let me share one of his quotes where he says, "The better parts of one's life consist of his friendships." The better parts of one's life consist of his friendships. Abraham Lincoln. Verse 13. "Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more." For in verse 14, "He who comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom, I saw all the living who walked under the sun, and they were with the second youth who stand in his place. And there was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and grasping for the wind." Now, what he actually does here is he lifts up three kinds of people. And the wording, I understand, is a little bit tricky as you're reading it your first time through. You get the poor, wise youth is better than the rich king who is not favorable. But then there's a third character, but he calls him the second youth, which is just telling us that the third character he introduced is another young person. But this young person, what he's telling us, he comes out of prison. He grew up poor. He had hardships in his life. And what he is saying is that third character, that man that resembles both, he's rich and he's the king, but he was poor and young. He's saying that guy, when he rules over people, is one of the most phenomenal rulers because he understands the hardships of life. But then his ultimate conclusion is this. In the end, people don't remember him anyway. So what's the point? That's his mindset. That's where he's at. He's like, so ideally, you'd be better off being young and poor than rich and unfavorable. But then there's even the guy that's all of the above, but yet in the end, he's forgotten. So what does it matter? So that's chapter 4. Chapter 5. I told you we're going to move quick. You doubted me. What's your problem? Oh, this is going to go on forever. No, it's not. Stop it. This chapter is going to go on forever. I'm just kidding. Well, let's move. Let's do this. Chapter 5, verse 1. Solomon says, "Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear, rather to give the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know that they do evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few." For in verse 3, "A dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. And when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. And do not let your mouth," in verse 6, "cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messengers of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there's also vanity, but fear God." You guys remember, and I can't help but notice this, it's so awesome. And here's a man who is so bent on the idea that he's not going to bring God into the equation at all, but every time he can't help but do it. He thinks about the injustices of life and the suffering and the rich and the poor and the kings and all of it. And he's like, okay, well, here, let's think about when we go to worship God. I thought we weren't mentioning God. What's going on here? But he can't help but mention it. It's something we've talked about over the weeks. It's so fascinating to think about. But his advice is actually very sound, good advice. Walk prudently. When we go to Israel and we visit the southern steps, those of you that have been there, you know that they're very oddly designed. They're wider and narrower, higher and shorter than each step. And the idea is if you go and walk them to this very day, it's awkward. You have to walk diagonally, and you're just getting up them is a strange thing because you like kind of start and stop the whole way. But the reason they designed those southern steps that led to the Temple Mount, where you go to worship God, was that as the pilgrims have come through their journey to the southern end of the place of worship, you all had to go up the common set of steps. Those steps are fascinating in that we know for sure the Lord was there and taught his disciples, for example. That was one of the places where teachers would go and teach their disciples and others that wanted to hear. And it's so amazing that Neil Armstrong, when he visited the Holy Land, he said he wanted to go where Jesus actually walked. And one of the things about going to Israel is we don't always know he was here, he wasn't, we're not sure, we can't verify this. Some places you can. So when he was in Jerusalem, he said, I want to know exactly where Jesus would have been. And then they had freshly uncovered these steps. And they said, emphatically, we know that the Lord Jesus was on these steps. And he said, I am more excited to be standing on these steps than I was to be standing on the moon. So that's a pretty cool thing, a little history there in the southern steps. But the idea was when you went up to worship, the steps were awkward so that you would have to pause and contemplate your worship before God. You're not just running to the house of God. How many of us do that to church on Sundays, right? Right? You're like, we're going to get there even if we're late. And it's just like stressful and chaotic. That's not a great way to show up to church, just for what it's worth to you, like a little side note, right? It's nice to come to church relaxed, right? And like the Psalms say, enter his courts with thanksgiving and praise, Come contemplative and worshipfully to the Lord's house, to his gathering. And so he says, walk prudently when you go to the house of God. Don't be rash with your words. And here's the thing. He's acknowledging something. When we do that, when we come together and we worship, you've experienced it, I'm sure. You come to church. It doesn't even have to be here. You go to church, and the guy up there is teaching, and something hits you. You're like, wow, that spoke to me. That was so where I'm at right now. I can't believe he said that. How could he have possibly known? And what's really awesome is sometimes when that happens to me, people will come up and tell me that. It happens to every pastor. Man, I can't believe. How would you know? You got a bug in my house? You listen to what goes on? You read my mail? People say all that stuff. And one of the most amazing things is a commonality in that is usually the thing that they think was said was actually not said at all. It's fascinating to watch. I've taken so much credit for other great comments and quotes that people make. They're like, you remember the other day when you said this in church? And I'm like racking my brain. I'm like, I am 110% sure I did not say that quote. And I'm like, yes, I do remember saying that. Isn't that interesting that I would say that? I didn't say that. That's crazy, But here's what I found out. Is like when people are so touched in their heart when they come to church, they're so fired up, they don't realize sometimes that's not even part of the study or in the notes. It's like an extemporaneous thing. It's like off the cuff and a comment that's made, and it changes someone's life. It's like, how could you have known? Why would you have said that? And I love to tell people in those situations, I got to tell you, that was not in my notes. It's important you know that because I didn't plan that, which means you came here today and got a fresh word from God specifically for you, right? And when that happens to you, and it's like, there really is a reason we should go to church, right? Or whatever you think. Like, this is amazing, man. Well, in that moment, I'm going to tell you something you all know. You get excited, don't you? And what's the first thing? From this day forward, I'm going to go to church every Sunday. Until next Sunday when my niece has a birthday, right? It's like you say something in a moment, you're so fired up. And he says, listen, when you're in that place, go contemplatively. And as you're there, be careful to say anything. What's amazing is it says in the New Testament, let the women be silent in church, right? Which is a whole thing we could talk about. I love that verse. No, I'm just kidding, actually. But the idea, right, but here's the thing. We all act like, oh, no, the women need to be silent. We all need to be silent. We all need to be quiet and slow with our words, don't we? So we all get worked up. But what does that verse mean? Let the women be silent. Hey, let the men be silent too. How's that? Let's all be quiet. Let's not run our chops and say things we're not actually going to do. That's what Solomon's saying. Let's all be contemplative. Let's all be careful about the things we say and do when it comes to the worship of God. We can treat it so casually and so lightly. And here's the thing, guys. We can come in here, we can get fired up and say all kind of things. And maybe there's a place for that. Maybe you're doing the right thing. But remember this. We can do that on a Sunday morning. We're dressed up, we're doing our thing, we've consecrated the time, we feel good, we drank 2 cups of coffee, not just one, all that, right? You got all that figured out. But here's the thing. I've heard this and I believe it. God does not care how high we jump on Sunday, but how straight we walk on Monday. Woohoo! Praise the Lord! What an awesome worship set! How's Monday morning looking for you? How are you treating your employees? How are you treating your boss? How are you treating your coworkers? How are you treating your wife? How are you treating your husband? How are you treating your family? Woohoo! Praise God! Sunday. Monday morning, you're cursing people out, ripping people's faces off with your words, right? He says, go carefully when you go and worship and be contemplative. Instead of talking, why don't you do some listening? Hear from God and think about what he's saying to you. And here's the last thing I can give you practically as a church-going person, church-going folk that we are. Glad you're here. So thankful I'm here to be even. Here's something that is true in life in general, but it's true in our worship to God. It is better to be consistently good than occasionally great. You know what I mean? Like just consistently, like for example, I'm just giving, consistently good would be like consistently just go to church. Even if you don't do some massively overwhelming thing, consistently good is better than occasionally great. And that is true in life as well, isn't it? And again, speaking of being an employee and all that kind of thing, what kind of employee is going to get a raise, by the way? The occasionally good or the occasionally great or the consistently good person? The consistently good person takes on extra shifts, they stay late, they help out, they're thoughtful, they do all the small little things that no one wants to do. But then you have the occasional great person that'll like a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, right? Like, woohoo! Wow, you had a great day. 1 out of 1,000, it's like, but if we're not careful, that'll be our worship to God in general, folks. Our worship to God would be like a huge spike one day and then all the way down, plummeting to the bottom again. Listen, consistently good is much better than occasionally great. And just remember that. And I've always said that when people backslide and come in and out of these doors, right? They come in and out of these doors over the years. They'll take 2 years off, 3 years off, 2 months off, 2 months off. They come in and out of these doors. But they'll remember the people that are faithfully, consistently sitting in the seats where you're sitting. And when they see you, and you're like, I don't do much around the church. I just kind of come and I kind of clean up the potluck or something, right? When you think like that, just remember, consistently good is better than occasionally great. Because I'm telling you, because I used to be a backslider, I know what it's like when you think about church and you're like, man, I know where that family sits, I know where theirs, and when I walk in, they're going to pinch my cheeks and all that stuff, right? You know that. But you don't think about the occasionally great person, you think about the consistently good people that just do the right thing over and over and over again. So what he says is, when we go to worship, let's just not get cranked up on excitements. Let's make sure that we don't go hastily, but we go and we go contemplatively and we consider God. Now, tucked in all of this is a really, truly a standalone verse that is worthy of something I must mention here in verse 3. This is the New King James. I like the old way better, but here it is. Dreams come through much activity, or out of the abundance of much busyness comes many dreams. This is the one I like better. But here it is. Dreams come through much activity. I have used this verse many times over the years to answer the question, do dreams mean something? Do dreams have implications? Do dreams mean things? And this is not the only verse on dreams in the Bible. There are men in the Bible that literally, physically had dreams, like Joseph and the rest, these men that had dreams. We're told that people will have dreams and they'll have significant meanings in the book of Joel, chapter 2. But I use this verse to remind us that not all dreams are spiritual. I would just say this, biblically speaking, some dreams have great significance. Other dreams, they mean nothing, and I mean nothing. Right? Like when you got like in your dream, they're so weird, aren't they sometimes? Like a giant crow the size of a man walks up to you smoking a cigarette and he like ushers you to an island made out of candy and you're like, what am I doing here? And like, what does my dream mean, Pastor? Stop doing drugs. I don't know. That's my first. What does my dream mean? Seriously, like some dreams mean nothing. They don't. They're just bizarre. It's like, and this is the verse. This is the verse right here. Dreams come through much busyness. You got a very busy life, very active sociologically or even psychologically. Psychologically, think about it. This is unbelievable. I have to remind you of this morning, but it's so cool. You have a supercomputer made out of meat behind your skeleton. Yeah, we can end there. That's pretty cool. And that thing is just thinking. It's doing something, and it's doing all of this. And it's just going crazy. And the more you do in life, the busier your life is, and you can't keep up with it. When you finally rest, your brain is still actively trying to process all the things it's seen and done. And therefore, you got these bizarro dreams. And I'll tell you this, I love and hate melatonin. How's that for you? I don't do it. I'm not addicted to it. I know it can be very addictive. I've had a season where I use it for travel, particularly Israel. It's a long, long flight, and I cannot sleep on flights. I've taken melatonin, sleeping, PM pills, all that, and I'm still staying up on the plane. I'm like, this is so. What I have a new plan when I travel that far. I stay up all night, and then I hit it the first night I'm there. I'll hit like a small dose of melatonin. I've got it mastered now, but it was a work in progress for a while. And one time I came out, and I truly cannot even tell you the dream that I had, but I had to tell another brother. There I go with the communion piece, right? I was like, dude, I have got to tell you this dream. And I told him the dream, and he's like, whoa, man. He's like, that sounds like a melatonin dream. I didn't even know that was a thing. I was like, whoa. I said, there's such a thing. He said, yeah. How many milligrams did you take? I was like, how many should you take? It's like, because I've always prided myself in a way, like I have just a crazy pain tolerance to medicine. I don't know what it is. It goes all the way back to my old days or whatever, but crazy pain tolerance or tolerance for medicine. And it just takes so much to actually do its job. I've had dentists curse me and say, there's no way you can still feel your teeth. And I'm like, doc, it's okay, just do it. And they're like, I'm like, it's kind of numb. They're like, no, your whole body should be numb. It doesn't make sense, like. So I'm only saying that to classify when it comes to melatonin and how much I'm about to tell you that I took, okay? For a lot of people, they say half of a milligram, right? Half a milligram will knock you out. I'm like, 1 milligram wouldn't even scratch my brain, right? So I'm like, I'm just doing the math. I'm thinking, well, surely 5 milligrams would help me. That first night, it's like, no, it did all right, but I don't think it helped. So Gabe Schwartz, who was with me, and he was my roommate, we call him Gabraham Lincoln, he was there, and we took 20 milligrams apiece. I don't think you can get high off melatonin, but whatever dream state that you're in, that's what I did, 20 milligrams. And the guy was like, so how many did you take? I was like, 20 milligrams. He's like, don't ever do that again. It's so bad for you. So really, truly, all that to say, melatonin dreams are wacko, right? But dreams in general can be wacko. But I can tell you this, on the serious, helpful side of things, some dreams have very important meaning that you'd be wise to pay attention to. You might have a reoccurring dream, and it's worth you thinking about and contemplating. I don't know if you know this, but Abraham Lincoln, throughout his life, was curious about dreams. He'd have dreams, reoccurring dreams, and he was very humble about it, but he was very curious about it as well. You can read about his life and his curiosities, and he would often ask people, like, do you think dreams have meaning? And they're like, no. His own wife was like, no, they don't mean anything. He's like, oh, okay. It's like, well, because I had kind of a neat one the other night, and he would tell, and they'd be like, wow. Abraham Lincoln would go on during his presidency to have dreams about the battles during the Civil War and their outcomes perfectly. And then he would get the news days later, this is what happened during the battle. But he would have dreams of the specific details of the battles. So Abraham Lincoln was what we literally call a dreamer. But probably the most important one I want to share with you tonight, and just to illustrate the fact that dreams have significance, is that much like Charlie Kirk, Abraham Lincoln had dreams of his own death, and in it being the way that it was. So days before, in April 1865, came out and asked his wife, are you sure that dreams don't have significant meanings? She's like, I don't think they really do. He says, okay, well, I just have a dream that I'm struggling with. I had it the other night, and I can't shake it. And his dream was something to the effect of he was going through the White House. He woke up in the middle of the night in his dream. He walks to the White House. There's a solemn funeral happening, and there was a body in one of the rooms. And he asked one of the soldiers, who died? And they said, the president, he's been assassinated. And he shared that with his wife, and she was like, why would you share that with me? He's like, I'm sorry. He's like, I'm just telling you, it's troubled me, and let's just hope it's just a dream. Do you know the first words out of Mary Todd's mouth after he was shot was, the dream was prophetic, is what she said. The first words out of the First Lady's mouth was, the dream was prophetic. Charlie Kirk had similar dreams. I won't go through all that, but he had the premonitions and the dreams that were telling him, I'm going to get killed in a fashion in such a way that is going to be a massive catalyst that's going to be part of turning point and change things in this nation. He had those dreams, and they were real. So all that to say, friends, I do believe that some dreams have significant meaning. Not all dreams. The verse here that means a lot to me is most dreams really just less pepperonis on the pizza the night before, sort of thing, right? That would help. So verse 8, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high officials watch over high officials, and higher off officials are over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all. Even the king is served from the field. So the idea is everybody at the end of the day is just a person. Yeah, there's rank and order, but everybody is just a person. Even the king needs to eat from the field, man. So in verse 10 he says, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This is also vanity. And in verse 11, when good increases, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? And then he says in verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. How interesting. You know, sometimes it's funny, we think, if I were rich, all my problems would go away. I'm not rich, not even a little bit. But I know enough rich people, and I've had enough rich people confess to me, I can't sleep at night. Ever since I got the money, all I can do is think about it. Ever since I put it in the account, all I can do is think about it, and it drives them nuts. And Solomon says, honestly, to be a blue-collar laborer who goes to bed and he might not even have his belly full of food, at least he can go to sleep is the idea. Something that I just stumbled upon a couple months ago, I shared it at the church on a Thursday night, and since then I have been profoundly blown away by this reality. Young people in our day and age are struggling to sleep. I found that out like grassroots, by the way. There was no study or anything like that. The more young people I've talked to, they've confessed to me, I have not been sleeping good. I've tried to give them practical advice, diet, exercise, shutting off the screen before bed, those kinds of things. There's a lot that could be said for that, but folks, a lot of people are struggling to sleep. But before I talk to you about that, remember this in verse 10. This is so key. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. It's worth me saying again, even though it might be redundant at this point, you and I, no person, can ever be satisfied in consuming or attaining anything. Consuming or attaining, you can never consume and you can never attain enough of anything to be satisfied. Nothing. You can never have enough sex, you can never have enough money, you can never drink enough alcohol, you can never do enough of anything. Anything. You can never do enough of it and be satisfied. In fact, the more you do of it, the less satisfied you will be with it. It's really a fascinating reality of human life. And he says it right here, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. I had a boss, it stuck with me, Judd Bragg, years ago. Must have been closer to 20 years ago now. It's the guy that taught me how to do construction, and he said, you know, he'd always have like these Abraham Lincoln kind of quips or whatever. He's like, you know, they say that having a bunch of money won't make you happy, but I wish someone would give me some so I could try it sometime. Like, what? That's wrong. He just always had those little sayings, you know. But no, it's really true. And I don't have the paperwork here today. I won't bother you with it. But you know, right? You've heard about the lotto winners, the megabucks winners, the Powerball winners. And the common theme, the common statement, people that get inheritances, and they commonly say, I wish I never got the money. It's crazy. Like, how could you ever say that? And they say, I wish I never got the money. Because that's not the thing that will ever satisfy you. But back to the sleeping of the laboring man. Again, it's nice to have dreams, isn't it? I know what it's like at a season of my life. Turn the page and I just couldn't sleep. I always prided myself and I could just hit the pillow and be out and sleep the amount of time I needed and wake up. And there was a season of my life where I just could not find sleep. I couldn't pay someone. Here's what I learned too is you can't pay someone to make you sleep. You know, I guess you could have them hit you in the head with a frying pan or something, but at the end of the day, if you want to just have a normal night's sleep, it's not easy. for the person that believes in just living life honestly before God and not being medicated to death, just hard to find some sleep, man. And so there's something to him saying, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. There is something about working so hard and doing things in your life that you're tired at the end of the day, right? That goes back to the whole person that does nothing, the person that's super busy all the time, right? It's important. It's huge. But I'll tell you this. I just heard a story of a pastor and his grandfather. His grandfather was 98 years old, just passed away a few months ago. His grandfather was 98 years old. He was born on the farm that he would die on 98 years later. Born and raised, lived on this farm for 98 years, just shy of 100 years. And every day of his working life since he was a little lad, all the way up until he's 98 years old, just 2 months before he died, he was still working the farm at 98 years old. And his grandkids came to him and said, you know, whatever, Pappy, Pampy, Bumpa, Bampy, Bumpa, you know, that, Bunka, what, why? Why are you still working this farm? You're 98 years old. Why? And he said, when I was young, I thought I was working to keep the farm alive. Now I realize I'm working the farm to keep me alive. 98-year-old man. Thought I used to be working to keep the farm alive. Now I realize I'm working the farm to keep me alive. You know, and in our fast-paced society, people don't get that anymore, do they? The pleasure and the dignity of going out there and just digging up ground, moving a post, taking care of some cattle, living a simple life, working hard until the day you're 98 years old and you pass away. No, I want to be a YouTube sensation. Yeah, that's lame, actually. How about that? There's enough of those people doing that. They can keep it, right? I know it's on everyone's thought list. Like, when I grow up, I'm going to, yeah, well, that's cool, man, I guess. But I think it's really cool when it says the sleep of a laboring person is sweet. It's like just do an honest day's work and go to bed. And that's a wonderful thing that people can't take away from you. All right, last few things here. There is, in verse 13, a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there's nothing in his hands. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And in verse 16, this is also a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. So the first troubling thing is in verse 13. He says, you know, this person that keeps these riches, he doesn't do anything with them. It is so sad that this man will not even enjoy the wealth or use it in some capacity. He's just stacking it. It's like, do something with it. Use it. That's one of the most profound things on the Dave Ramsey show that I've heard over the years is people that call in and the amount of money they have. And they're like, Dave, should we buy a new moped? And he's like, you should buy a moped factory with the money you have. What do you mean, buy a moped? But people just pinch pennies so hard that they never just enjoy the penny. I just thought of a thing I heard Sandy Adams say about Chuck Smith. He's like, I've never met a man that could sign over paperwork so quickly and just hash out millions of dollars, but then turn around and squeeze a penny so hard that it makes Abraham Lincoln squeal. That's what he said about Chuck Smith. Yeah, you don't want to be making Abraham Lincoln squeal when you got a penny in your hand, you know. But this guy here, he just can't even enjoy it. He's just so hoarding it. He's keeping it for himself. And I guess just a quick summary statement was a story of a rich man that passed away. And they went to his estate and they asked the lawyer, how much did he leave behind? And the lawyer said, everything. How much did he leave behind? He said, everything. It's a good answer, isn't it? Because that is the reality. Verse 18, here's what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all of his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God has given him in his heritage. And so verse 19, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, given him power to eat of it, to receive it, his heritage, and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on all the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Conclusion, enjoy life. And that actually is a good conclusion, man. Enjoy the life that you have. Enjoy the life that God's gifted you with. Whatever your profession is, whatever your background is. He says it's good that a man would enjoy his life. Eat, drink, and enjoy the good days of the labor that he has. Right? Some people ask me, like, why do you work out or why do you run so far when you do these things? Because I can is my answer. Do you know that? Because I can. Because if I were in a wheelchair, I know that's what I would want to do. I wish I could run. I wish I could do those things. So do the things you can do. Enjoy the life in front of you, man, right? Enjoy those things. But at the end of the day, there is some sort of macabre thing underneath all this. And you know what it is? That's all that life's about. That's all that life's going to sum up to, is just you enjoying what you can while you're here. That's not true, man. There's a life after this. Here is the reality that I will end with this morning that's helpful for all of us. If you are a believer, and by that I mean you have placed your faith in Christ and his death on the cross as your Lord and Savior, if that is true of you, this life that you are living is the closest that you and I will ever get to hell. What I mean is, people live life and they say, I'm living in hell, man. No. You ain't living in hell. You're living on earth, man. And thank God for that. This ain't hell. This is not hell. And I'll tell you this again. If you place your faith in Christ, this is the closest we're going to get to hell. But if you haven't, this is the closest you're going to get to heaven. So enjoy it. And I don't mean that like negatively or maniacally, just factually. If this is all you're ever going to know, and you're not going to go to heaven, this is the best it's ever going to get. And that is dismal. That is sad. And the most you can do is enjoy it while you're here, right? And my favorite old statement, a t-shirt that I saw years ago, come to the dark side, we have cookies, right? It's written in Star Wars font. Come to the dark side, we have cookies. And as he walked away, on the back of his shirt, it said, welcome to the dark side, we have no cookies. And that's hell. That's real hell. Yeah, this life here, this is not hell. This is as close to heaven as a person's going to experience when they end up in hell. So my ultimate encouragement is that every one of us are sure, absolutely sure, of our relationship with Jesus Christ and our eternal destination. But I would remind you of this, believer, this is the worst it's going to get. So let it be whatever it needs to be. That's why the Christian brothers and sisters that have been persecuted in the last 2,000 years, they would give up their lives because this is the worst it's ever going to get. Right? All the betrayal, all the hurt, all the lies, all the injustice, all of it. It's the worst it's ever going to get. None of that is in heaven. It's specifically in Revelation to tell us there will be no more tears. There will be no more pain. There will be no more, so many things I want to fill in the blank there. Mortgages and diapers and whatever, all the stuff, right? There won't be any more of that stuff. But I do fear and feel for the people that you are living on a short time clock, and this is as good as it's going to get, so you might as well just sauce it up and have fun, man, because this is all it's going to ever be for you. I can honestly lay my head on the pillow at night and say, I am not sad to see any of this go. I love my family and all that, the church family, but when God calls me home, that's going to be way more awesome than all of this. So this is the worst it's ever going to get for the believer. So would you stand and pray with me this morning?